Welcome to the Golden Crane Award-winning Color Success Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie J. Wong. Natassia Kwan is an attorney, activist, and AAPI community advocate. Natassia was named a top 40 young lawyer by the American Bar Association in 2018 and is a graduate of the ABA's Young Lawyer Leadership Program. As an attorney, Natassia has defended companies and municipalities in personal injury, class action, and commercial matters. Natassia has litigated complex matters in state and federal courts, including multi-district litigation, and has taken and defended numerous depositions of witnesses throughout the country. Justin Zhu is co-founder, executive director of Stand with Asian Americans, SwAA. It is the largest coalition of businesses, activists, and nonprofit leaders fighting for Asian American safety, justice, and equity. SwAA was formed in the aftermath of the Atlanta spa shootings with a full-page WSJ letter signed by 1,000 Asian American leaders, including CEOs of Zoom, DoorDash, Alphabet, to #Break the Silence on anti-Asian racism pervasive in the streets, the workplace, and our institutions. Evan Low has represented Silicon Valley residents in the California State Assembly since 2014. He first held elected office as a council member for the City of Campbell, where he went on to make history in 2010 as the youngest openly LGBTQ+ mayor in the country. Assemblymember Low now serves as chair of the LGBTQ Caucus. In 2015, he launched the California Legislative Technology and Innovation Caucus, whose members include a bipartisan group of Assembly members and senators. Assemblymember Low is also vice chair of the Asian and Pacific Islander Legislative Caucus. During his time as an elected official, he has authored numerous laws that have increased government transparency, advanced equality, reformed the criminal justice system, helped small businesses, and encouraged job growth. We are literally writing history right now, and I have Assemblymember Low on, Justin, and Natassia. We are so happy to have you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, Stephanie.
Assemblymember Low has to hop off pretty early, but you wrote and authored this bill to get Lunar New Year as a state holiday, AB 2596. And so what was the significance of this bill for you to even take all this time to author?
Well, first off, thanks very much for allowing the conversation about how we can uplift our AAPI community. And much of this is done in a partnership as a team. So Natassia and Justin and so many others who are doing work in the space on the ground in the community is so critical in making sure that government and society reflects our values, which leads into that of Lunar New Year as a holiday. We recognize that there are many other celebrations that are recognized in the United States and also in the state. And it's equally important then to ask that key question: how do we help ensure that we are also recognized and uplifted in this way, similar to many other communities? And this allows for the significance for us to pause and to ask the question, what is Lunar New Year? Why is this celebrated? Who are the community members? And to allow for this cultural understanding and dialogue as well. So I'm proud of California being one of the first to endeavor in this arena, and I'm hopeful that others will follow suit.
I hope that's the next level, because I'm a San Francisco native, and I noticed, Assemblymember Low, you went to De Anza, San Jose State, which is where my cousins and many of my friends have taken that road. And so we always had that Lunar New Year off as a holiday, because at Lowell High School, 90% Asian American, right? So it was like, well, people are going to call in anyway, so might as well excuse everybody. But people may not understand the huge undertaking it takes to write a bill, to author it, and to even make these steps to propose it to Gavin Newsom. So can anybody kind of expound on that? What does it take to put all this work into it?
Well, first, I also want to make recognition that at the federal level, Congresswoman Grace Meng has a similar proposal at the national level. And so it's not by coincidence that the two authors of both California's law and also at the federal level in Congress happen to be Asian American as well, which then makes the point that much more clear. It drives the point home, which is it's important to have Asian Pacific Islanders in government as elected officials so that we can help ensure that our voices are uplifted in all throughout the halls of government. So let's continue to make sure that we ask members of our community to put themselves up in serving in our democracy and our community as well. Your question was about a legislative process, and the process is such that any legislator can introduce a bill, a legislative proposal, and it goes through what we call a policy process to have discussions, debates about the merits of the policy, and then we also have the fiscal analysis, which is on the fiscal side on how much would a holiday cost. So when we first introduced the legislation, it was a holiday in general, just in totality, whereas it needed to be pared down to that of public employees because of the inherent cost that we would have on an unfunded mandate. And so you have to balance out some of these proposals. Many ideas sound really great, but when you think about the implementation or who's going to pay for it, that is where it gets a little bit more tricky. But we're so proud that we have an ally in our governor who has had a history of commitment to our community. And we need to continue on and seeing what the next step is, building off of Lunar New Year in the state of California.
Absolutely. And Natassia and Justin, what are your thoughts on this? What do you feel is the cultural significance of passing this bill?
I am a Chinese immigrant, and I'm so grateful for Assemblymember Low's leadership and bravery to even bring this bill to the forefront. I don't know whether it's done before, but I remember my joy when I heard that it was. And when Justin and I were reaching out to various organizations to see who would want to support, people were so excited, right? Because people were saying, I've lived my whole life wanting this to be a holiday, and I'm so glad someone stepped up and actually proposed this. So I'm so thankful to you, Assemblymember Low. For me, I want to start sort of micro and then move to macro. So on a personal micro level, I remember growing up as a Chinese immigrant, and my mom would spend the Lunar New Year week making lean go. Lean go is these little delicious little cakes, right? They symbolize like the new year and prosperity. And she'd spend the week making them. They'd fill the house with this beautiful aroma. And she'd spend the week. We'd have these decorations that we take out of stores. It's like it's like Christmas for the Asian community. Take out these decorations, and I'd want to have the time to help her and talk about these customs and the culture and the traditions. But I wouldn't have time because my mom said, be like a Monday through Friday. You have to go to school, and school is very, very important, right? In our culture and in my family. And so I said, oh, okay. So I would always feel like I was missing out on that. And I'm sure I'm not the only Asian American who felt like they missed out on time with their family during this important cultural holiday. And then, I remember conversely, we'd have these other holidays, right, where we would be required to take off of school, and I would just sort of be sitting there, like, like twiddling my thumbs, like, all right, well, I don't have school today. So I think it's really important that the millions of Asian Americans in California now who are Asian American will be able to celebrate this. And on a macro level, Asian Americans, if you look at the history of how Asian Americans have been treated, you have the Chinese Exclusion Act, you have, the Japanese internment. And I'm speaking today, by the way, in my personal capacity and not as a deputy city attorney for the city and county of San Francisco. But I will share a quick story, which is that I put together this continuing legal education course on the untold legal history of Asian Americans in America. And even within the lawyer community, I was shocked to learn that there were a lot of lawyers who don't know about a number of cases involving Asian American civil rights that made it all the way up to the California Supreme Court. So, for example, Mamie Tape versus California was a little Chinese girl who was excluded from her public school in San Francisco. And so you have a history of Asian Americans being treated as other or perpetual foreigners, et cetera. So the significance of a holiday, right, a holiday that recognizes our culture and our background really cannot be overstated. So this is such a huge symbolic victory. And I give really all the credit to Assemblymember Low for his bravery in making this happen. And so, it's just really exciting. And, it's an exciting time overall because this is one of many other victories, right? We have an Asian American superhero. We have an Asian American vice president. We have currently the California Supreme Court, the Chief Justice is an Asian American woman, Tani Kantil-Saka-Uye. So we're finally getting seats at the table and being in the room where things are happening. And I want to continue this positive momentum. So thank you again, Assemblymember Low.
Thank you for sharing that, Natassia. So what's the cultural significance from your perspective as well?
Yeah, so I was born in Shanghai, China, and came when I was 8. And I remember just my favorite time of the year was Lunar New Year, and we visit all the relatives, and there'll be fireworks and food, and it was just a sense of pride and love that I felt from the community. And since coming to North America, we have, my parents and I'm an only child, we haven't really celebrated Lunar New Year. I think it's just kind of odd when it's the three of us. And so, what has happened was, during Lunar New Year, of course, school's still happening, and then we will call our relatives. And over time, what I really felt for me was that sort of, Asian culture isn't really quite celebrated in America, and a lot of my personal experience has been assimilating. Not eating Chinese food to the lunchroom, right, and not speaking any of your languages and not talking about your culture, and it was only until I moved to the Bay Area and seeing the historic Chinatown and seeing all the Asian Americans around that I felt the sense of belonging and pride, and hey, really could express our culture. And so when Natassia and I saw Evan Lowe's bill and Grace May's bill, like, wow, this is amazing. What a gift it would be to the community to see this holiday enshrined in the state calendar, in the future, the national calendar, to say, hey, Asian Americans belong here. Of course, Lunar New Year, that there's been a rebranding, because in the past, it would be called Chinese New Year or other names, but many countries celebrate Lunar New Year. And so it's actually celebrated by about 2 billion people around the world. And so I think that this is a great step forward in inclusion of many Asian Americans. Certainly, there are more groups that should have holidays as well celebrated. But I think this is a good step, and hopefully, as we quickly come up to our New Year next year, we can feel the difference and see, hey, wow, it's actually popped up on our calendar. Many other people who may not know about Lunar New Year are starting to learn about it and appreciate our culture.
Absolutely. And yeah, my husband's pet peeve when we say Chinese New Year. So I'm so glad that this is encompassing various Asian American groups. So this brings me to the why, which is always fueling many of us to take on these endeavors. So Assemblymember Low, what is your why for doing this advocacy work? And what challenges have you faced? In the spirit of the show, we always talk about that as well.
Well, a couple of things. One is I would be disingenuous if I did not tell you that oftentimes the work in this space comes with political peril. You're oftentimes battling with limited resources and or a false narrative in which it's a battle between different groups about the acquisition of power, but rather this is about shared prosperity. And how do we reframe this to help ensure that uplifting the AAPI community does not come at the cost of taking down another community? So number one, helping to reaffirm that, because oftentimes in even recent events, if we're following what's going on in the city of Los Angeles, unfortunately, these are deep-seated, rooted challenges that various communities face. And so even as we talked, for example, about Lunar New Year, I will tell you, I've had some legislators come up to me initially, just off the cheek, and just say, well, why should we have this holiday? Does that mean that we should have a holiday for St. Patrick's Day, a Jewish holiday, Native American, and every other holiday? When does this stop? And I had to pause to best assess and figure out how to communicate effectively without being emotional to this individual, because of course it felt like we were being minimized, that we weren't seen as an AAPI community. And I felt that it was an important role to channel the feelings in a productive way to help understand where we have come from, and talking about our history, which is why we need to remember our Asian American history, and that's why we need ethnic studies. And by the way, California does have mandatory ethnic studies as a requirement, which also encompasses Asian American history. When we talked about California proposing requiring minorities in corporate boards, the state of California passed a bill to require companies incorporated in California to have a certain percentage of minorities in its C-suites. But they defined minorities as Black and brown. That is the truth. And so we as Asian American legislators had to come to our other allies, our other colleagues, to help discuss and have a dialogue as to why this is unacceptable and how we need to go up with respect to shared prosperity, similar to that of our Hollywood tax credits. In California, we provide tax credits to films and studios who film in California. And what we said was it's important that because these are public subsidies, we want to see more minorities and Asian Pacific Islanders on screen. And that's all part of the essence of uplifting the community. And when we talk then about stopping Asian hate, we passed close to $165 million going to community-based organizations and ethnic media and ethnic press to help inform our communities as well. So in answering your question, we've done a lot to help uplift our community, but we're not done. And I just need to reaffirm this point that while yes, we as elected officials are doing this work, but we cannot do this. We cannot do it and get it across the finish line without people like Natassia and Justin, because they are helping to ensure that our community is engaged and is informed, and that it's not just a politician's advancement or proposal, but rather this is a community effort as well.
That's really important to underscore the community. And I love that shared prosperity, because I think a lot of times, and this is where Asian Americans, AAPIs fall through the cracks, is that I was even talking with a Colombian colleague where I said, you know, Lowell High School went through a lot of issues where they wanted to provide a lottery system, and I won't go into that. But the idea is that when Asian Americans, it's viewed as they're coming up, it's like we're not a minority anymore. And that creates distance between that other ethnic minority groups as well as, but we really don't get the same treatment, right, as like white privilege. But thinking a little bit more about your why, Natassia and Justin, why do you do this? Why do you continue to put yourself out there to push these things forward in the community?
So for me, I think a lot changed when I had a child, frankly. I think instead of looking just to my own life, I think about the next generations of young leaders and them having an opportunity to feel like they belong in this country. And I think a holiday, like a day, you know, there's so many wonderful holidays already, Martin Luther King Day, Juneteenth, Christmas, Thanksgiving, but to have a holiday, I mean, I feel like Asian American children now in California can feel like, oh, there's a holiday for me too. And I think belonging is really important. I wanted to share two stories that show some of the challenges that I face as an Asian American attorney. And it shows on this level how this like perpetual foreigner and these stereotypes about Asian Americans have really manifested themselves in incorrect assumptions about Asian Americans. So, you know, every legal conference I go to, there's some sort of DEI panel where a woman or a person of color tells some variation of like this same story that I'm about to tell you. And it's being mistaken as something or some role that you're not. So one time I was in the Bay Area and I was going to court for a hearing, and I was checking in and I was representing the defendant, a major Fortune 500 company. The sheriff in this court said, ma'am, excuse me, you need to enter on this other side. Like he literally directed me to like a separate entrance. He goes, the court reporters come in through here. And then I corrected him. I said, no, I'm not a court reporter. I'm the lawyer representing the defendant, a Fortune 500 company. And you know, that really bothered me like for the rest of the day. And it's something that I still remember because the fact that Asian Americans are not represented, right, And I have some data to back that up. So the California State Bar recently published that they're 14% of attorneys practicing law in the state of California are Asian American. 14%. Now compare that to the number of Asian Americans in San Francisco, which is 35%. And the number of Asian Americans in the 9-county Bay Area, which is about 25%. So Asian Americans are already disproportionately represented in the legal profession. Of that, 8% of the 14% are Asian American women. However, if you look at the top echelons of the law, whether it be the judiciary, elected political officials, or law firm partners, the number is drastically lower. So if you look at law firm partnership and executive committees, only 4% of those positions are held by Asian American women. And this is true, the California Supreme Court for many decades never had an Asian American until 1996, when Justice Ming Chin became the first Chinese American justice. So this is all to say that these are challenges, micro and macro challenges that Asian Americans have faced, and so that inspires me, because I know that there's momentum now and we are making progress, but I do want to make the world better for my child and the next generations after us. And that, I think, we have a moral and ethical obligation, a duty to blaze that path for them.
Well, Justin, I'll give the floor to you. I did want to hear what your why is.
My parents and I, and it's the case with, I think, all of us here, whether it's our parents or our ancestors, we left everything in our home countries where our ancestors have lived and died for millennia to be here, right? For the promise of this American dream and justice and equal opportunity. And so when I started my journey here and did what I was supposed to do and got into college and worked in tech companies, started my own company, I started quickly realizing that it doesn't matter what you achieve, the racism against Asians it still exists, right? You go on the street or even in any space, you're still seen as an Asian person. And so one of our co-founders, Eric Kim, he says, you can't out-achieve racism. And so I think that's really a core part of, what I felt. I've been fortunate to be in spaces where, I have a voice and I have resources. And when the Atlanta SPA shootings happened, I had my whole company switch our marketing on socials internally to talk about the Atlanta SPA shootings. But what I saw was a lack of response from many corporations, from media outlets, and including many Asian American leaders who just didn't know what to say. And so that's really why we got together, Stand with Asian Americans. We wrote this letter that we put into Wall Street Journal that expressed the frustration that we had with the rhetoric of the last president and the hate and the violence on Asian Americans. And calling for resources, calling for fair representation, supporting ERGs. And we had that letter signed by the founders of Zoom and DoorDash, YouTube, Yahoo, so many amazing Asian American leaders. And that was the first time such number of Asian American leaders came together in this directed way. And when I thought after that moment, if we hadn't come together, a couple of my friends, and put that effort together, like this wouldn't have happened, right? And so we're in such a sort of special place in the Bay Area where there's so many Asian Americans, about a third Asian American, that if in the Bay Area, and there's a recent survey in San Francisco where the number one issue facing Asian Americans is safety. So your basic need of safety is not being met in San Francisco, where it's almost 40% Asian. It's really kind of you hopeless in a sense if you're giving that statistics to the rest of the country. And so my why is that this is my country, my home. There's nowhere else I'm going to go. My future children, their children will live here, and I want to make sure that they fully belong. And I think the other part, we talked a little bit about it in terms of how we get there, is that we're fortunate to live in a democracy, right? And it's foreign to the East. And in the democracy, we have the First Amendment right to free speech, to protest, right, to assemble, right, and that's a core part of our democracy. And so, if we're not using sort of some of these constitutional rights, then we're not going to be represented. And of course, voting is another core part. And so, part of what we have to do is really we went from a more of a sort of authoritarian or by decree country to where it's democracy by the people, right? And we have a voice that we have to speak up, and we need to really feel safe speaking up. So there are barriers in making sure that we know what needs to be done and how we can get support resources. But it is I would say an early journey for us. And I think this Lunar New Year bill is a great example where it's not a controversial thing, right, to pass this historic holiday and that we can all support. But hopefully this creates a flywheel where we can support more and more bills and get more integrated into the democratic process.
Absolutely. So if you take anything away from this interview today, it really is to vote, right? Because we need to continue this momentum. I did want to talk with Assemblymember Low about mental health, because obviously that's near and dear to my heart. This whole show is created on the notion and the mission of destigmatizing mental health among AAPIs. Speaking of, underutilization of resources, the stigma, what do you think contributes to that? And what do you think the legal system and the government can do to help facilitate change in that arena?
Well, the arena specifically towards AAPI community members is that of a couple of things. One, recognition the cultural competency that is required within members of our community, especially when it relates to stopping AAPI hate. How do we make sure that those frontline responders, whether it's a police officer or firefighter, whatever else it might be, to be able to deal with some of these issues and some of these other cultural norms? How do we make sure that our local entities reflect that as well with individuals that come from these spaces? And so that's the work that we are doing right now in helping sure, for example, it's referred to post-training for law enforcement officers, to making sure that there's cultural competency with respect to members of our community, because that's fundamentally the question that we're dealing with right now, which is how to help ensure that what is the next step for us in tackling stopping AAPI hate? What is the next thing after Lunar New Year as a holiday? And of course, the stigma around so many of these different issues is one that needs to be recognized as a cultural norm, that in fact, so many of these issues, we don't like to talk about our problems. We keep things to ourselves. We don't want to call a police officer. They just keep things quiet. We don't want any problems. We're going to keep to ourselves. We're self-sustaining and we don't need anyone's help. Whereas we realize that in American democracy, in this society, what is required is for us to help uplift and ensure that our public funded resources, social services, are directly tailored and conducive to the utilization for members of our community as well, especially our immigrant community, who oftentimes when we're talking about mental health and stigma, so many are being trafficked. There is oftentimes wage garnishes and wage theft. So how do we make sure that when these things happen, that there are adequate resources, that they know that government is also here for them and they are seen as well?
Natassia had me on to speak to the Asian American Bar Association. And it was so important to see AAPI women and having this interest in it, right? So what do you think we can continue to do to destigmatize, to push the efforts for not only our generation to even seek professional help if needed?
Sure. I know Justin and I have been talking about there are some bills that have been proposed in Congress to destigmatize Asian American mental health. So I'll let him speak more about that. But I do want to talk about, with respect to mental health, something that I've observed as a sort of hidden epidemic among Asian American attorneys, which is burnout. And it kind of stems from a lot of things, imposter syndrome, the model minority myth. But I want to share a story about that. So I have a lot of friends who are Asian American attorneys in corporate law. And there's this thing that we hear in law school and in the early years of practice, that as Asian American attorneys, you have to work twice as hard to get half as far as our white male counterparts. I find that really interesting. And it wasn't until many, many years of practicing law later that I realized, oh no, that saying is really, really harmful because I was basically working, 60 plus hours a week. I was working super, super hard. And I was doing well, right? But I felt so burned out, and I know a lot of my Asian American attorney friends felt so burned out because we really internalized this idea that we need to like strive to this like level of perfection to like get a seat at the table and to just be seen as competent as people who are non-Asian. And I think that's really an unfair standard. And then it leads to a lot of attorneys, Asian American attorneys, talented ones, leaving law firms, leaving corporate sector, leaving the law like completely. And that I think also helps explain why when you look at the top echelons of again judiciary, government, law firm, the percentages, and I can speak to the data as an attorney in that profession, is the data really does show that there's like this narrowing of Asian American, that we're going to law school at the same rates as our population, but when it gets to the top echelons of the legal profession, we're not there. So I think mental health is really important, right? Coping with burnout, making sure that you don't get burned out. The imposter syndrome, this is something that I've published on through the American Bar Association, which is overcoming the imposter syndrome and realizing that if you're in the room, you deserve to be there. If you are at a wonderful, successful law firm and you made partner, you deserved that, right? And so instead of feeling like an imposter, right? And that imposter syndrome is tied to our Asian American identity. If we're seen as a perpetual foreigner, if we're treated that way by society, be it through holidays or be it through microaggressions, then that's going to bleed into our mental health day to day and how we live our lives. So I do think there's a little bit of shame too in seeking mental health. I think about like my mom who worked 4 minimum wage jobs, and I don't really have any memory of her ever complaining about that. So at first, I was scared to like reach out to a therapist because I'm like, oh, does that make me weak? Does that make me? I just felt like shameful. But then I realized like, okay, it's a pandemic. Like there's all this stuff going on, and I think mental health and therapy is like super important. But I do think there's like a current change in thinking about that, and I'm glad that there is that mindset shift.
Absolutely. And I wanted to advocate right here is that therapy really is a conversation. It is not this scary thing. Just as we go into our medical providers, I mean, we talk about pretty sensitive things. I mean, folks have to do colonoscopies. I mean, what could be more personal than that? So I think that there's this idea that it's some scary thing to talk about some of those stressors that are going on. But a lot of Asian Americans show up at the ER or their primary care providers with psychosomatic issues, and they can't find anything quote unquote wrong with their stomachs, with their headaches and things like that. So it really is important that we think about health as integrative. Justin, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think the mental health aspect, it's so critical because there's this common saying, I also feeling where in the East where you sort of eat the bitterness, in a sense, you suppress the suffering, it doesn't go away, right? It's you probably feel it in personal relationships, right? Something happens, you can suppress it, it'll come up later, but in maybe sort of unexpected ways. But so that suffering that we have just from growing up here, feeling racism or being separated from our home countries, having to fit in this model minority stereotype where we have to be perfect, right? Or even more than perfect, or what that really makes us feel underneath is that, hey, we're less than human, right? If we had to work twice as hard as someone else, right, to get the same outcomes, in a sense, our time is worth less than someone else's time, our life is worth less than someone else's life. Then you can sort of expand that to, okay, is that the same in the justice system? If I were to file a lawsuit, like, do I have to have twice as much evidence or a better case, right? Or if I were to file, a petition for something or vote or run for something, right? Like Evan, right? Do I have to be twice as good as the next candidate? In a sense, like that does happen. And more that sort of more you experience it, more you realize, oh, this is an unjust society, right, for Asian Americans, and there's just a host of sort of issues that go into that. And so I think to start, like we need to start making it possible for us to speak about mental health, and stigma is a major issue. I think few of us speak about mental health with our parents, and they're dealing with their own things that probably are unaddressed that gets passed down to us, or it's influencing our lives. So I think the potential, though, I think with the younger generations, that we are more open to speaking about mental health, and this is really where bills and funding to actually speak about our issues and go into the finer details and kind of humanizing the Asian American sort of person is going to be helpful. And there is a bill that Congresswoman Judy Chu introduced last year, which is to end mental health stigma in the AAPI community. That's a federal bill which instructs the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, to provide outreach and education strategies for AAPI community. And it directs the institution to partner with local mental health and culturally competent organizations so that they can figure out the right strategies to reduce stigma, because this is a pretty wide problem. But that bill, Congresswoman Chu reintroduced, part of it's because of the rise in anti-Asian hate. But even before that, mental health has been a serious issue. Asian Americans have the least help-seeking behavior of any group. So when we have issues, we don't really seek it. I think looking at 2020, there were about 2 million people who should have received some kind of care for mental health. 2 million Asian Americans who did not. So it's really a wide issue. And so until we can really address our mental health issues, in a sense, we are injured. This is sort of we are held back, right? And once we are able to heal that, it's going to allow us to speak up more and fight back, right? And have sort of the energy to continue to fight, because when you're thinking about this being a fight for our civil rights, you also need to be able to heal. So if you can fight well, you can heal well, then we're going to have a really sort of vibrant and successful community and movement. So it's critical to really are getting more civil rights and really feeling the full belonging here.
And I smirked because my dissertation was just on that, of seeking behaviors between Asian American college students and white college students. And that was in 2010. So we're still facing that in 2022. That's how pervasive the issue is and has been. We've alluded to it. There's been so many hate crimes directed towards people in our community. And there's a fear there. I mean, my mother carries around, the huge, not a huge thing, but a small noisemaker that makes a very high pitched sound, because even though she looks like she's 40, she is a senior by legal terms. And so there is a fear there for many of our elderly, as well as just in general, sending our kids to school. So what do you think that we can do as a community on the ground to continue to advocate for these change? Because, some people will say, well, the government, it needs to change something. But what can we do as civilians, as citizens, to push many of these things forward?
Well, that's a perfect question actually for Justin and Natasha, but let me just say that just to share with you an observation from the government. Government is responsive to their electorate. So when we talk about this, government will reflect the electorate and the voting population. And I was very specific about that, the voting population, whoever votes specifically. And of course, when you look at the voter turnout, especially amongst Asian Pacific Islanders, it's abysmally low. And so if we expect to expect to be seen, to be visible, and to get the type of respect, it'll require members of our community members, to engage and to hold our officials accountable by organizing, by showing up at city council meetings, showing up at school board meetings, and demanding from our government and our elected officials. And that's where the advocacy, the grassroots effort, and amplifying the message is so critically important. The work that I do cannot be done without people like Natasha and Justin. And so that's a perfect question on what they're working on to help engage in making sure that we are not apathetic, and that, yes, it too can be important AA community members to be involved and show up at a protest and to scream. It is not a cultural norm. Again, go out there and protest and use swear words and get a blowhorn and stand on the streets and get arrested in civil disobedience. But guess what? That's the only way we're going to demand justice. And that is not something new. This is very much in the essence of American history. If you look at the women's rights movement, the farm workers' rights movement, Black Lives Matter, LGBT rights, all of these things are cultural norms. So we need to own it and making sure that we empower people like Justin and Natassia as well.
So what you're saying is my potty mouth is very much needed.
Yes.
I'm just kidding.
Yes.
I'm kidding. I took away the main message, which is we do need to be loud. We do need to push against cultural norms and this idea, even for, AAPI women, right? Just that idea that we should shrink back. And that is definitely not where future generations need to be. So, any last words of encouragement or hope that you can kind of impart on folks today?
Well, again, I look forward to hearing more about the incredible work that Natassia and Justin are going to be doing because, frankly, it's exciting. I get excited. I've been doing this type of social justice work for close to 2 decades. And when I first got started, there were so few of us. But now this is a moment in time, and it's an unfortunate reality that the Stop AAPI Hate movement has galvanized our community and it's woken us up. But I hope that this is sustained over a long period of time, and that, Stephanie, we can also help partner with you to amplify the voices of so many that are doing work in the space and helping sure that we are seen in all segments of our society as well.
Absolutely. Anything you need from me in terms of, advocacy and mental health, like that's where it's at. And similar to Natassia, I have 2 young daughters, and every time I think about quitting, they're like, "Mommy, you're gonna quit the podcast? Like, what are you doing?" So I think there's a motivation. It's not about me anymore. It is about future generations and standing up for what essentially is right and fair and equitable. So thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I love the sweater. It says love. And I think we need to trademark the shared prosperity thing because
I love it.
To fund our efforts now. But I really appreciate you being here today and making this work in your schedule.
Well, thanks so much. And I'll leave the conversation to the rest of you. And I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Justin, Natassia, and Stephanie, thanks so much for the time. Let's continue on and we'll see you in the streets.
All right. We'll see you there.
Thank you so much. I did want to just piggyback on one comment that Assemblymember Low made that really resonated with me, that he said, you don't make change by just sitting idly by and keeping your head down, that it's so important to speak up. And it reminds me of this Chinese saying called the loudest duck gets shot. And I use that as as part of like a paper I wrote when I was in law school, because the counterpart to that in the American culture is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So while the Asian American idiom is like, we're telling our kids like, loudest duck gets shot, like don't speak up, don't keep your head down. The counterpart is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So it's like that well-behaved women don't make history statement, right? That it is great that we have a new generation of activists who are willing to step up and be loud. And Justin and I have literally held rallies on the steps of courthouses being like, listen to us, Asian elders deserve justice, and keep Asians safe and all that. So it's very empowering and uplifting, and it's so important that we have like the wonderful government officials, elected officials who are speaking up for us in those important chambers of change.
Absolutely. We have this concept of cultural humility. In the mental health space, cultural competency has kind of been the way that folks have done and talked about ways that providers can know more about cultures. But here's the thing is that we can't know all about every single culture in the world. And so what cultural humility is just that idea that you're not better than anybody, to be curious about someone else's cultural experiences, the intersectionality of identities. And I think there's just so much to be done here. The other part is I'm glad that there's a cultural center that Washington, D.C. has in place, SAMHSA, to be able to look at equity. And so the other part of that is having enough mental health providers to meet the demand. The positive part is most of my patients are of AAPI descent, Asian, Asian Indian. And so people are seeking help. It's just the demand for it. And that's why the podcast exists, to provide resources, to provide stories for inspiration, because we can't see every single person one-on-one. And I hope, even though it makes my business booming, that I'm not just one commodity, right? That we have more people that look like me, where people feel maybe more comfortable in sharing some of their struggles with. So again, in the spirit of the show, what are some of the challenges that you've addressed in both your personal and professional lives? And I know, Natassia, you mentioned the burnout piece, but anything else that kind of weighs you down that you've had to kind of face for yourself?
There was something else, to piggyback on what you said, Dr. Wong, the cultural competency. I do think it was a challenge that so a lot of law firms and legal employers have like an EAP program, an employee assistance program, where you can reach out when you need mental health resources. And I remember all during the pandemic, and I'm fine sharing this, is that during the pandemic, I had a baby. And then I also, the Stop Asian Hate, all the Asian hate crimes really started to skyrocket. And I really wanted to seek some help. And so I remember reaching out and trying to find an Asian American therapist. And it was like I received a list of mental health providers through my employer, and like there weren't any Asian American options. And so if I wanted to find an Asian American option, you had to pay out of pocket. And I think that presents like a real challenge and burden for a lot of employees and a lot of individuals who are seeking, because they want to talk to someone who like looks like them, especially if they're talking about something that's unique to their race and cultural background. And I know I already spoke about one story about a microaggression that I still remember to this day, but there was like one other story, and this is very similar to the dozens of stories that I've heard at legal conferences from other women and people of color. But I remember I went to a deposition once, and I was a young attorney assisting a partner, and the partner was a Caucasian male, and I was a very junior attorney at this time. And the opposing counsel asked me to sit on the side of the room. He goes, "Oh, okay. The partner sits here, the witness sits here, and then like the intern sit on the side." And so he just assumed that I was an intern. And so it's just stuff like that like really sort of chips away at like your feelings of competence. What Justin said really resonated with me, that like racism cannot be overcome by merit, and it can't be overcome by like achievement. That the systemic challenges as an Asian American will always be there, no matter how accomplished or how much you achieve or how much merit you have. So that's a challenge. But again, I do want to shed light on the fact that I have a lot of hope, and shed light on like all of the momentum that we've been building as a movement, with representation in film and business and politics. I think we're making inroads. So despite the challenges that I've faced, I am very hopeful that things are changing for the better.
And now I know why Partner Track resonated with you so strongly,
Yes.
because that's exactly what happened, in the show. And I won't have spoilers. Like, we had the cast on, they talked about all these aspects of the show, but they do a really good job of showing what people face in the legal system, and Arden Cho kind of embodied what you were even saying that you've experienced.
Totally.
And it takes a lot of strength to stay in those situations. And just a funny story is, I used to prank my students, because I would sit where the students were, right? I wasn't that much older than them. And they were like, "Oh, where's the instructor? And are you the TA?" And I would sit there until the start of class and then walk to the front, right? And so I guess I was a rebel even when I was younger. But I think that there's those aspects, right, of sometimes you have to laugh and so you don't cry. But I think that piece of really sticking in there and hanging in there when times get tough is really the message that we're talking about today. Justin, did you have any thoughts or anecdotes about some of the challenges you faced as well?
Yeah, I mean, so I founded a company shortly after my first job, and I was a CEO, and all throughout my experience, I felt like that the bar was so much higher for me to raise funding, to get the recognition, to get customers. My earliest investors were mostly Asian Americans who gave me a shot and felt could really kind of understand what I was here to build. And even the later stages, especially as we got bigger, there was a sense that like we wanted more of a professional sort of white person to be the CEO because that was what it took. And one story I'll share is that when we were pretty early, we had gotten to about $1 million of revenue and actually became profitable. And this Asian American investor heard about our company and wanted to meet me. And so I was excited because I really don't see many. And he was a later stage investor. And at the end of the first hour, he told me, and I was like, in my mid-20s, he said, "Hey, Justin, this is like really great. Let me give you some advice. When you get bigger and want to be successful, you're going to want to hire a white CEO because that's what it takes in America." And I was a CEO and I was, busting my butt working crazy hours, right? To, show that, hey, you could be, as an Asian American, you could be the leader, you can be the CEO, right? You don't have to, move your seat. But then when I heard that from him, I just realized, wow, there's so much work that I have to do that, the sort of the society must change to show that, hey, we could be the leader. But this is the way he gave me the advice, almost from like a bigger brother perspective, in the sense of, hey, let me help protect you because this is what's going to happen. And I didn't believe him at the time, but as my company started growing, that was the sense I got, right? And if you look at getting to the public levels, there are very few Asian Americans who are CEOs or who are in board positions, even though we make up a large percentage of the employee base, right? Some of these big professional companies were upwards of 40-50%. But single digit percentages in terms of top leadership, right? And we kind of, in a sense, minimize that into this bamboo ceiling. But really, to even have a bamboo ceiling and even like be able to hit your head on it, you would have to crawl through glass and nails, or you have to breathe through toxins every day, right? It's really indicative of a toxic work environment, right? And so, we kind of the industry calls it microaggressions. Really, that's just racism. That's just casual racism that you face every day. And especially when these are from educated, professional coworkers who are just casually having racism, that's really concerning because, they know better, right? But they're doing it anyways because they can, right? And so my biggest, I would say, burden and struggle is like, how do we change this culture and this lack of justice for Asian Americans? Because since starting Stand with Asian Americans, we've done a lot of reports from Asian Americans who face discrimination in the workplace, and there's no place they can go to get support, to get legal help, to get press support, and even find therapists who are Asian American who can understand the issues, right? And so because of that, we recently started a portal so that you can report discrimination in the workplace, and we've lined up legal and mental health services that we can connect folks to as they come in and really get some help, because this is a pervasive issue. And you probably see this in your practice. Like, part of treating your mental health isn't so that like the pain and suffering just goes away. It actually helps you figure out, okay, I have to do this, right? This is how I can address it, right? So if you've been wrong, right, there are actions you probably need to take so that you actually feel whole again. That, right, whether, or even with your parents, some of what I face and what I do today is because of generational trauma from my ancestors. And so in a sense, there's been such a history of injustice for Asian Americans since we've gotten here, from the Page Act to the Chinese Exclusion Act to internment to so many things, and now this wave of anti-Asian hate. But that's been pervasive since we've gotten here. And how do we establish justice for Asian Americans? And we recently hosted the renaming of Bichamatana Pakti Way, which is after the Thai grandpa who was pushed and killed at the beginning of the kind of the rise in Asian hate. And one of the speakers there, Amanda Nguyen, she shares such a beautiful framing in that the peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice. And in our Constitution, it says the first things it says to build a more perfect union, we establish justice. And so that's really fundamental to really kind of having this really better society. And so that's the fight that we have. And so my burden is, how do we get more Asian Americans together and really fighting back, and also starting seeing successes? Because if you look at whether it's a hate crime, whether it's a workplace discrimination case, like how many stories have you seen of convictions of people winning, Asian Americans winning, right? We need to start winning and seeing that building momentum. And so that's really where I'm feeling the kind of the pressure and also the hope too, because we are going to have wins, right? And that's going to build and build, and we just got to keep going.
Well, I know, Natassia, you have to hop off. So, and Justin, you nicely wrapped it up, but you mentioned hope, and I don't want to have toxic positivity, but what can we continue to, what sources of hope do we have, basically?
Yeah, I'm happy to offer some last remarks on that. Justin so beautifully spoke about justice, and Justin and I and many other Asian community organizers have been putting on these like big national and local events geared towards amplifying and uplifting Asian American victims and telling their stories in efforts to raise awareness and also to help them heal. And that website is asianjusticemovement.org, and Justin's organization is at Stand With Asian Americans. My Instagram is at Natassia, is how it's pronounced, but it's at Natassia Kwan. And we have lots of events. And the hope that I have is that this next generation, they are dreaming big. They are seeing an Asian American California Supreme Court Justice. They're seeing an Asian American Vice President. One of your questions, Dr. Wong, was about how has that changed in different generations. I know in our parents' generation, it was like survival. Many of them had immigrated. They were trying to assimilate and just survive day by day with their struggles. But now I feel like with my daughter's generation, this next generation, we have had inroads, right, where they have more representation, so they can see people who look like them and start to dream bigger, that instead of an impossibility that they've never seen anyone in these important roles, that they can dream it. And I want to give credit to my first mentor in the legal profession, Judge Edward Chen. He was the very first Asian American federal judge in San Francisco when he became a magistrate judge in the Northern District of California. And he was super formative for my journey because he was very vocal about trying to overturn the Korematsu case, which was an unjust case heard by the Supreme Court regarding the Japanese internment. And so he inspired me. He was like more of an OG AAPI activist, and he inspired me. And now Justin and I are mentoring a bunch of next gen 20-something and teenager Asian American activists. So this is how the movement lives on, right? Is like these generations passing along stories of bravery and courage. So I do have a lot of hope, and I'm really grateful for you, Dr. Wong, for giving us this opportunity to speak about the work that we've done.
Well, this will be a lifelong partnership. So, I know that we're going to continue to talk offline, and it doesn't escape me that you give the closing remarks. I think that's really important, because as an AAPI woman that has been pushed to the sidelines in your early career and continue to face, I hope that you continue to speak up, and know that both you and Justin and Assemblymember Low really are, and this is why I wanted you guys on the show. You guys are writing history, and this is what our youth need to know, is that people are out there doing that look like them. So I just so appreciate you guys for being on the show and becoming lifelong friends. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. I will talk to you guys soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Color Success Podcast. Listen, like, subscribe on all major streaming platforms, YouTube, IG, and if you want exclusive content, you can join our Patreon. All links can be found at colorofsuccesspodcast.com.